Hi guys, welcome back. This is Sean from Play by Boss, and today we have a real-world comparison with one of our favorite focal lengths, Nifty 50. In one corner we have the Sony Zeiss 55mm and the other side we have the Sony 50mm 1.8. I have been wanted to do this test for a while and finally we are here. So we have been using these two lenses in a lot of our wedding projects and commercial shoots. I would say both lenses are amazing, with the price being the main difference and point of consideration for many people. The Sony Zeiss 55mm is 3 times expensive than the 50mm 1.8. But does it perform 3 times better, or is just because carrying the Carl Zeiss brand, even though it's made by Sony? In this video, we're going to show you a real-world side-by-side comparison that focuses on filmmaking. But before we jump into the real-world comparison, I would like to talk about the design and the physical build. Both of these lenses look similar, but the Sony Zeiss 55mm is slightly longer than the 50mm. Aside from that, the Sony Zeiss 55mm is 100 grams heavier than 50mm. It might not sound a lot, but you can definitely feel the difference when you hold it side by side. Aside from that, the Sony 55mm is construct fully metal, and as for the 50mm is much more plasticky. Something to keep in mind, even though the Sony Zeiss 55mm is fully metal, but you can easily get scratched from time to time. As for similarity, they do not have a manual focus switch, and unfortunately both of them do not have a weather seal. So that's all for the design. Let's jump to a real-world comparison. For comparison today, we're going to split into 4 parts. First off, we're going to talk about the image quality in terms of sharpness and creaminess of a bokeh using their widest aperture. Second, we're going to talk about how they're going to handle lens flare in different scenarios, outdoor, indoor. Third, we're going to talk about autofocus. We're going to use tripod and also gimbal for this test. Last but not least, I believe some of the filmmakers might be concerned about, which is the lens motor noise. For the first AF test, we're going to start with a gimbal. We're going to have 2 zine crane tools side by side, and then we're going to place the 55mm with the A7 III at the left side, and then we're going to have another A7 III with the 50mm at the right side. Let's try and see how it turns out. Okay, looks good. So now we're going to push the limits of the lens. We're going to try a running shot. So I'm going to have my 55 at the left, 50 at the right. My shutter speed is 1/1000, f2, ISO 100. Joe, are you ready? Ready? 1, 2, let's go! And so after the run, I saw this beautiful sunset. I believe it's going to be a very good place to have a lens flare test. So let's jump right in. So now we're going to start with an autofocus test, but using a tripod. I'll ask Jo to walk towards the bench, and then she will just sit over there and then walk off the camera. Now we're going to have another AF test using tripod as well. Left side is going to be a 55, right is going to 50mm. And then I will ask Jo to walk towards the camera. Now we're going to do a touch focus test. So CK is going to stand over there, and then Joe is going to stand in front. I will just touch the screen and see how fast both of them can perform. So now we have a wonderful scene in front of us, and I think it's great for the image quality test. Now we're going to have an image quality / bokeh test in an indoor scenario. We're going to start with f1.8 slowly to f22. Now we're going to have another bokeh test using the minimum focus distance of each lens. We start with the Sony 55mm, and later we're going to swap to the 50mm. Okay, so for this test, we're going to see how both of these lenses are going to handle lens flare in an indoor scenario. So let's try. Now we're going to have an AF test in an indoor scenario. We're going to set up our camera in this way because we want to have a more fair side-by-side comparison. Left side is going to have the 55mm and the right side is going to be a 50mm. Both are using A73. Our AF drive speed is going to be fast. AF track sensitivity is going to be responsive. Both cameras is in the AFC mode. Now we're going to have another AF test. This time we're going to have the touch focus test. We're gonna have two models. One is Joe, another one is going to be our mannequin, Amy. Now we're gonna focus on Joe. Now Amy, Joe, Amy, Joe, Amy, Joe, Amy. Now we're going to do the same test, the noise motor test, but just that we're going to use the touch focus instead. Let's try. Final thought, which is the better or best choice? Normally I'll categorize my preferred lens into three categories. First, autofocus. Second, weight. Third, image quality. Let's talk about autofocus. I'll give a higher rate for the Sony Zeiss 50mm, but it's not drastically faster compared to the 50mm. The Sony 50mm might be slightly slower, but it performed pretty well for the walking and running tests. So if you're not into sport photography or videography, you can definitely consider this lens. As for the motor noise, I only realized the motor noise from the Sony 50mm during the touch focus test. You can definitely call up some motor noise using this 50mm lens, so something to keep in mind. Next up, let's talk about wave. We use gimbal a lot in our project, and wave is definitely one of the key points to consider. Both lenses weight more or less the same, so I'll give this round a draw. Lastly, let's talk about the image quality. We're going to talk about the sharpness, bokeh, flare, and also color fringing in this category. Let's start with sharpness. The Sony Zeiss 55mm is definitely sharper in the widest aperture compared to the 50mm. Next, flare. Both lenses handle flare pretty well in indoor scenario. However, I do notice the Sony Zeiss 55mm produce some sort of squarish vertical flare or light leak in an indoor scenario. I'm not too sure whether it's a good thing or bad thing, so I'll leave it you to judge. A bonus round for this. After I watched all the videos side by side, I realized that the Sony Zeiss 55mm produced a slightly brighter footage compared to the Sony 50mm. I'm not too sure why, so if you do know the answer, feel free to drop in the comment. I'm more than happy to read it. Aside from that, I do notice the Sony Zeiss 55mm produce a more pleasant skin tone compared to 50mm. In my point of view, the Sony Zeiss 50mm produce a more reddish skin tone compared to 50mm. So if you're into a skin tone, you might be considering this lens. Which is the better lens? I would say both lenses are pretty amazing. We own both of these lenses, and we have been using these two lenses for a lot of our projects, and it works flawlessly so far. I still remember when the time I started my career, I have my Canon 50mm 1.8. It's a budget-friendly lens. It's not the best lens ever, but it gets the job done. What I'm trying to say is, instead of focusing a lot of time in gear, why not focusing more in aesthetic and also creative parts? We can always shoot a great project using a cheaper lens with some techniques, let's say lighting, framing, directing, storytelling. All these skills is much more important than the gear itself. Anyway, one of the good things using a more budget-friendly lens is you can afford to drop 3 times more than the Sony Zeiss 55mm if you think about it. Anyway, hope you guys like this video. If you guys do like this video, remember to subscribe our channel, and then remember to create, learn, and have fun. I'll see you guys in the next video.